Hello and welcome to Black History All Year. I'm your host, Kay Baker. Today we're going to be talking about Julian Francis Abele, and I'll tell you later why I know that's the correct pronunciation of his name. This individual is the second artist that is highlighted in my book, KB's Black History Volume 1. Julian was an architect who designed hundreds of buildings with little to no recognition personally. And what he did was he made a significant contribution to the skyline of Philadelphia. Now, I always want to say how I feel about or how these individuals impacted me, and I see myself in this story because I have quite often had to be the silent partner in a collaboration where my colleagues got all of the credit even though I did the lion's share of the work. So while we're talking about this conversation or having this conversation, check to see where you do all of the work in a project and get little to no recognition. I know it's still happening. This is the timeline that I like to utilize as I have these conversations. And obviously in 2021, we know as African Americans that we're still dealing with the same foolishness, even all of these years later. We're still having trouble getting white Americans to allow Black Americans to live with the same rights and equity as they have. Not all of them, but as a society or as a systemic organization construct. So Julian was born some 16 years post-slavery, but given the considerable heat that we're feeling 400 years later, you can imagine how acrimonious it was for Black people 16 years post-slavery. Just keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about Julian Francis Abele, and we're going to talk about who he was and how he came to be who he was, the wonderful individual inspiration that he was. We're going to talk about his accomplishments, his many accomplishments, and we're going to talk about what his effort and impact means to those of us now living, right? And the impacts it'll have for us in 2021 and beyond. We're going to meet Julian Francis Abele, and we're going to celebrate his accomplishments that ultimately shaped the Philadelphia skyline. We're going to look at his educative steps. We're going to look at what led to his initial accomplishments. And we're going to talk about the list of architectural projects that are credited to him. As always, I'd like you to, as you're listening to this conversation, engage with yourself, decide or look at what positive attributes that you share with Julian Francis Abele, because I know there's got to be a lot, or what passion have you had, or that you can now embrace, knowing that Black African American people were and are leaders in this area. There's lots of areas where Black people are not represented. When we were leaders in these areas, recognize that a lot of accomplishments for Black people were hidden. And so now that we're uncovering these accomplishments, you can now see yourself in these areas and know that you do have a legacy of success in these crafts. So Julian Francis Abel was born in 1881, which was 16 years after the abolition of slavery, which we all know happened in 1865. His father, Charles Sylvester Abel, was a milliner. What is that? A milliner is a hat maker. Anyone who has ever been to a black church and been to a Woman's Day or a Mother's Day celebration knows about the importance of wearing a straight up bad hat. And this is one of the places it started, right? With the hat makers that made the hats for the mothers and the grandmothers in the church. His mother, Mary Jones, was a washerwoman. We know that during that time, that was one of the easiest ways for black women to get work, was to take in laundry or take in washing, because again, at the time, they were the ones who had been doing the domestic work. So 16 years post-slavery, I'm sure there were a lot of white women who still didn't know how to do their laundry, so they hired the black women to do that. So that was a great way for her to be able to contribute to the family income. And they obviously needed it because Julian was the eighth of 11 children. But the thing is that, these two individuals, Charles and Mary, they were not playing around. They had a particular standard that they set for their children, and they were not going to be deterred. These children had high expectations, and they had high standards to adhere to. They were expected to become educated. They were expected to marry well and be successful in business and to carve out a respectable lifestyle. This is what they were expected to do, not, if they felt like it. Philadelphia was a progressive community. They had a lot of African Americans that had been there for multiple generations, and these were black people that had been free, because there were lots of ways for African Americans to be free. So even though it was only 16 years past post-slavery, these blacks in this area had been free for multiple generations. So they did not have a slavery mindset. They had a free business mindset. And of course, we're hearing more and more in the news that there were lots of black individuals who were business minded. We just know that there was a lot of terrorism that was focused at these individuals at that time, which is why it occurs that there weren't, but we know that there were plenty. And one of our unlikely allies were the Quakers. The Quakers came into these many areas and they opened schools that they devoted to teaching African American people, post-slaves, right, newly freed slaves, to read and write and do basic math. And so that was very helpful to many of the blacks in that era. And of course, we are grateful to them for putting in that effort. Now, the mother, of course, had her roots in advocacy for African Americans, as she was a relative of Absalom Jones, who was the co-founder of the Free African Society and was the first black Protestant Episcopal minister. So Julian as well, was in a position to see black people as successful and as impactful in building the society. Tragedy unfortunately struck fairly early, in that Julian's father died when he was 12 years old. he at that point, what can you do but continue on? So he was enrolled in the Quaker school in the area that ended up becoming the Institute for Colored Youth. That is the picture on the top left. During his time there, he was assigned to do the commencement speech, and he did his speech on the role of art in Negro life and won a $15 prize, which, believe me, in the 1800s was a lot of money. A lot of money. I'm sure it helped the family, and it possibly paid for some of his schoolwork moving forward. He then enrolled in the Brown Preparatory School. I couldn't find a picture of that, so that's not pictured here. And he continued to do his work. And then he went on to enroll in the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Art, which is pictured. That's the picture on the right, on the bottom there. Now, at this institution, he received a certificate in architectural drawing. This was in around 1898. He received that, and this would put him at approximately 17 years old. He established himself as a watercolor artist, and he won another prize, the Graff Prize, the Frederick Graff Prize for work in architectural design. Now, Frederick Graff was a hydraulic engineer at the time, and so this was another prestigious award to receive. And again, he received a big $25 for this award, and this again was in 1898 at 17 years old. And so by the time he was 21, he had earned his Bachelor of Science in architecture. One of his first significant designs was the Memorial Gateway at Haverford College. Now, he was still a student when he did this work. He also did a commemorative plaque for the University of Pennsylvania, and this was in 1903, right? So he was, again, still in school, and he was about 22 years old. Now, he was doing this work. He continued his education, and he was now enrolled in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And during his time here, he was labeled as the most skilled architect in Pennsylvania, and this was at 22. And because of his ability and his willingness to work with others, his nickname became Willing and Able. Now, he was, awarded many prizes, and his drawings that were exhibited received much, much acclaim. He went to work for a firm, Lewis Hickman's firm, and now he, of course, began to receive international acclaim because now his work was being presented outside of his small circle of influence. So Hickman began to show his designs at internationally renowned exhibitions, including the Architectural League of New York. Which was a nonprofit for creative and intellectual work in architecture. But, you never see Abel's name mentioned, even though he was someone who received this award. He also received an award from the T-Square Club, which was another club in Philadelphia, which was organized in 1883, and it sponsored exhibitions that were providing student scholarships and held other types of activities. So he was getting some support from some of the other architects or other benefactors in this field. But I guess at this point he decided, you know what, I want to go and see what else is out there. So he decided that, maybe I'll travel for a couple of years. And you'll notice in many of the conversations that I have and that you'll find here that many of the African Americans of this time, took sabbaticals and went off to Europe to get some breathing space and to get some inspiration, right? So as he was leaving, he swung by Spokane, Washington to visit his sister, and he designed a house for her. Now, after he designed this home for his sister, it gets a little sketchy as to where he actually went. Many of the reports say that he went to Paris, and there's sketchy evidence that he possibly enrolled in or worked alongside the artists at the École des Beaux-Arts at the Sorbonne in Paris. He continued to travel and got a lot of influence, right, by working in and around French and Italian architecture. So, of course, this made an impact on his life. And remember, he's still a youngster. He's only 26 years old at this point. So he did come back to the United States. 1906, he traveled back to the United States, and this is where he became a member of the Horace Trumbauer Firm, which was one of the most prestigious architectural practices in that area. He ended up staying at this firm for the whole of his career. He never left this career. It was really good to him, but he was really good to them as well. He basically carried this design firm. As you see, at 28 years old, 1909, he was promoted to the chief designer. At this point, he designed a 17th century French chapeau French chateau-inspired mansion on Fifth Avenue in New York City. At the time, this was considered the most expensive residence on Fifth Avenue, and it's currently the Graduate Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. And it is located on Fifth Avenue and 78th Street in New York City. He got married, and it's nice to know that these individuals were able to have some type of married life. He ended up marrying a white woman, a French white woman, and they had 3 children. They had one son and 2 daughters. Julian Jr., the middle daughter died from the measles, Marguerite, and then they had a second daughter, Nadia. They had a good life while they had it, meaning that they were recorded as enjoying the symphony, opera, that talks about them enjoying different wines and, even football games. So they had a good social life. However, they they separated after 8 years of marriage. And of course, we don't hear any more about Marguerite or their children after that. Now, I added this because, there's a lot of confusion about political parties in this country. Right now, the definition or the positions of the political parties are the exact opposite of what they started as. As you see, the Republican Party was founded in 1854, and their forces opposed the expansion of slavery. They opposed slavery. Whereas the Democratic Party, which was founded in 1828 and is considered the oldest political party, actually was in favor of limited government and state sovereignty and slavery. So I guess the takeaway is whether you are calling yourself a Republican or a Democrat, you have to recognize that at some point, both of these parties were anti-Black and pro-slavery, both of them. So it's hard to choose one that is going to be beneficial to Black Americans. So Black Americans need to really just look at what is being proposed by either of the parties and just vote in a way that supports your morals and your best interest, and maybe not even claim a particular party. I wouldn't necessarily say go independent, but again, that's not part of this conversation. But, just be aware that whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they really aren't on your side, either one. Now, as you can imagine, during this time, Julian Abele never received credit for being the primary architect at the Trumbauer Firm. And, we understand even today, I'm sure he knew it then, but we understand it today that, no white person wanted to admit that all of the creative artistry was one individual who happened to be a person of color. That shouldn't be a big deal. But of course, we know back then it was a big deal because there was so much heat, there was so much riding on white people ensuring or comforting other white people by saying or proving or thinking that they proved that, they were somehow smarter, better, or more creative than people of color, which we know is not the case. So all of Julian's accomplishments were absorbed by the Trumbauer Firm, meaning that when things happened, when things materialized, when the drawings were presented, they were accoladed, of course. I mean, they received accolades and they received, acknowledgement, but they were always the praise was always given to the Trumbauer team as the general design team. They were never credited to Abele personally, when the majority of the things were primarily and or independently created by Abele. So the Widener Memorial Library was one of his creations. This is at Harvard University. Harvard University. You'll find that there. This was designed by Abele, a Black architect. He designed the Free Library of Philadelphia. So if this is someplace you've ever been, know that this was created by a Black man, Julian Francis Abele. The Philadelphia Museum of Art, designed by Julian Francis Abele, a Black man. The entire Duke University campus. There are some things I see now that say, well, this campus or that campus. No, the Duke University campus was designed by Julian Francis Abele. It took him 10 years to complete this project, and he wasn't allowed to visit while he was alive. Right? That was how petty the laws were, that even post-slavery here in early 1900s, the designer of the Duke University campus could not go on the campus because of his race, because of the color of his skin. And, the crash of the stock market happened during this time. And this project actually allowed the Trumbauer Firm to survive the stock market crash of 1929. But yet, the designer, the architect, could not set foot on the campus because of the color of his skin. But now his picture hangs posthumously in the Duke University institution. So, he continued to live his life, and in 1942, at the age of 62 years old, Julian Francis Abele was elected into the American Institute of Architects, even though he had been one of the leading architects for over 4 decades. They didn't put his name in the institution, or he was not acknowledged for 4 decades. That is just ridiculous. He died a few years later at 69 years old from a heart attack. He was honored in 1982 at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and he was honored in 2002 at the Philadelphia Free Library. He's acknowledged posthumously as a master architect, and there were, 650 minimum buildings throughout the country that he put his personal stamp on. He is clearly considered one of the most talented architects of the early 20th century. And it was his revival, right? His building designs that renewed the historic styles within the American landscape and the current architectural traditions. Abele was a pioneer African-American architect and remains an inspiration in a profession where Blacks are still a minority. So if you're someone who has architectural talent, artistic talent, this is an area that you can excel in. And you have someone that has paved the road for you already. So if you have questions about Julian Francis Abele, do some research. Let me know what your question was and let me know what the answer you discovered to it. Because we all would like to know more and we all want to keep this conversation going. Let me know what you found out. Let me know what your favorite pictures are. What was the favorite building or the favorite thing that he constructed that you resonated with, that you liked, or that you want to emulate? That would be very interesting. Remember, only positive energy will be returned. Please feel free to get your copy of KB's Black History, Volume 1, where you will find Julian Francis Abele and 15 other artists. There are 2 calendars available because obviously there's only 12 months to a year, but there are 16 artists in KB's Black History. So there are 2 calendars, one that covers artists 1 through 12, and then the others that kind of overlaps, right? It covers artists 5 through 16. Please, please, please get your copy and enjoy. So thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you for coming to my page. I'm Stephanie Baker Jones, Stephanie K. Baker Jones, or K. Baker. And my company, Layout Productions, Relevant Education and Lifelong Knowledge, is grateful that you decided to come spend this time with us and learn and have this conversation so that we can have Black History all year. Please like my page and subscribe. I really look forward to having more conversations with you on this topic. And please, let me know what you think, and so we can have some interaction. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next class.